promised that I would take a few minutes today, ideally 15, not much more, if that, to remark on anything that you bumped into on your current proposal that you would be valuing some kind of immediate response to, because it might affect the way you look at the next proposal here. Anybody got such questions or comments or observations about your first big task?
Ted, you mentioned that we were not going to do delimitations that much.
Especially in a descriptive proposal, delimitations are usually not that much of an issue, because in a descriptive proposal you're rarely that concerned about external validity. And delimitations are primarily a function of external validity. Yeah, you're going to need to think more about that for the experiment, right? And if you did it in the first, that's good. It's perfectly appropriate. As you know from the textbook, there are oodles and oodles of things you can pay attention to when designing a piece of research. What I'm trying to do is to take you through this morass of stuff and just show you where the islands are. You know the old story about the priest and the rabbi and the Methodist minister that were out fishing, and all of a sudden the Methodist minister got up and walked off, went back ashore, right across the top of the water, and picked up some stuff that he left up there and brought it back to the boat and got in there. And the rabbi thought, well, I'm not going to be outdone by these Christians. I'm going to get out there and walk on water too. And he did. He went right under. Whereupon the Methodist preacher says to the priest, "Do you suppose we ought to show him where those rocks are?" Anyway, I'm trying to show you the rocks that you can walk through this morass of stuff. And the reason I focus down on the relatively few things that I focus down on, and say, you know, do this, this, and this, is so that you can have a skeleton that'll work in almost any situation. And I've been at this long enough to know what the difference is when people get out and try to design research. If they've got some kind of a problem that's going to require elegance, it'll become part of what they understand and part of their understanding. They'll find the answer, especially if you have a good book or two hanging around. And the logic of it still fits together. So you'll find the other things you'll need as you go along. Suffice to say, I guess I mentioned this several times, a well-done dissertation proposal or a well-done piece of research design for some kind of professional purpose is necessarily going to be more complex than the stuff we're doing here in these 5-finger exercises. However, I'll have to tell you that I emailed to Muriel. She's going to be helping me read tonight and tomorrow. And Muriel Elmer, I emailed to her last night, and I, of course, reflected on the stuff you'd done the day before, if you remember when you did the research questions and the research topic and all that sequence of logic. And I also reflected what I'd noticed when I looked over your shoulders as you were workshopping on Friday for today's assignment. I said, what they've got on their papers already looks like research proposals. And in terms of the logic and the understanding of the flow of things, I think that many, if not most, have it fairly clear. Our problem is going to be, I said to her, to help pick up where the gaps are and to suggest what further refinement would need to be there for as many people as we possibly can. So we're going to work like crazy tonight and tomorrow morning on that problem. She's coming out, going to hang out here for a time, and then she'll go back. But we will have gone through all these, and you'll have it back by tomorrow at the beginning of the class. One of the reasons for this compulsion, and some of you who have done courses with me before know that this is the only course where I really take that seriously, getting paperback conflict. Usually it becomes extremely difficult for me because I tend to let my life get too crowded with other stuff. In this course, 921, at the very beginning of laying out my calendar for it, I block off these chunks of time for reading these papers because it's extremely important, I believe, in this course, to get stuff back so promptly so that you can get the use of it as you go on to your next step. And so these papers, Lord willing, will be back in your hands tomorrow afternoon with all sorts of commentary on them, suggestions, circled misspellings, and style error problems, and everything else we can dredge up in order to lay it on. Yeah.
You mentioned the other day that it would be helpful to put in sample tables, or not samples, but boxes, or I don't know, I wasn't quite sure what, I didn't do any of that, and I still don't quite know
Okay,
what.
all right. The point here is that if you're going to be collecting data of any sort, you ought to have some imagination what that data would look like. One of the things we'll have is lists of concepts that people are mentioning about so-and-so, lists of concepts. Well, if you have a little space that say lists of concepts about so-and-such, that's what I call an empty display. What's there? The fact that there's a display, the box around it, and the heading. And that is one of the things you do in section 4 of a proposal, is to lay in what you can anticipate as the ways you will organize the findings. So it's how do you display the findings, and how will you analyze those findings? The magic word is what? Content analysis or verbal analysis, right? And as you can tell from the bibliography here, there are beaucoup books on that, including several really good ones. So it's possible just to lay that kind of stuff in. Now also, especially in an experiment as we're coming to next, that's going to become very important, because you're going to have a lot of tabular possibilities, where you have an A and an X and a Y axis. As this factor goes up, this factor does what? Where you have some kinds of positive, negative correlations or something. A hypothesis is inherently a correlational statement. You ever think about that?
So in this kind of descriptive study, you might have graphs. Would you have like different kinds
It's possible.
of graphs?
Oh, it's possible. And the graph is, of course, a multi-dimensional list, quantifiable. But since you're doing non-quantifieds, it's not very common. I will not be terribly badly bent out of shape if you don't have your section 4 stuffed with a lot of ideas like that. I'd like to see something in there that says I have some idea what my data are going to look like, or at least what I'll get, what sorts of stuff will I get. Well, it's a little like saying, I'm going to go to the grocery store, but I'm not sure today what they have on special, and I'm not really sure what I'm going to get. Somebody says, well, you've got to anticipate. Yes, I am anticipating. I'm taking the car rather than walking, because there will be at least 2 or 3 bags. Well, what's apt to be in those bags? Well, I'm reasonably sure that I'll have some things like this, like this, like this. You can talk about the kinds and categories of things that you are likely to have to make room for, to display. So it's a little bit like not being sure what is going to come out, but having some idea what kinds of things are going to come out. You follow the distinction? And that's the same subtlety of distinction we use in reference to section 5, which is conclusions. Remember, what's the absolute rule about 5?
Don't guess.
Don't guess. No predictions. No predictions. So in 5, you don't want predictions there, but you do want to say we should be in a better position to deal with certain kinds of questions. Deal with them how? I don't know yet. Deal with them in terms of what evidence? I don't know yet. But it's that kind of question, because that's what the focus of the study is about. Section 5 for a proposal is really a kind of a statement of the value of the study. What good will it do us to have looked at this kind of manner of detail? Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Any others? Now that's the kind of questions that may be hot on your minds right now. You want to ask them right now. This is the time. I'm not going to wait for a lot of them because I'm not needing them. I thought maybe you might be needing them. Okay?
Is it acceptable to suggest that meaningful insights will be obtained to a specific group, that sort of thing? Is that a prophecy? Okay.
No, of course not.
No.
Not until you start naming those insights. No, what you're really doing is saying exactly what I said, except you turned it around to focus on the kinds of people that might be affected or find of value, what it is you're going to have. One of the things you want to be very careful of, however, and this goes for all research design, that you not presume that you're writing for the general public. You are not. The only general public readable research is called Parade Magazine. You ever see those stupid psycho researches that they do. You know, answer 15 questions and this tells you how good at whatever you are, you know. That is, for all practical purposes, entertainment. It has little, if any, research value. It's interesting entertainment, and sometimes I read them and do those things too, like I do puzzles, just to see what comes out. And every time you see a finding from that, you say, well, that's pretty good. That's kind of like me, or, you know. But I would find myself never saying, oh, I never realized that. You know, I'm in real trouble. Because it's junk, for all practical purposes. So that's the only place where you really find that your reading public is the public. Why do you do research? There are 2 or 3 possible answers now that we've developed since you've been here. But what are the major reasons we do research?
To extend the knowledge.
To extend the knowledge. To extend the knowledge. Well, who is it that's working with the knowledge at the frontier? The public? Rarely. The answer is other researchers. So somebody says, well, that wasn't very interesting reading. You know, if you ever ask your mother to read your dissertation, or worse yet, your uncle, I'll tell you, that's a real loser. Because these are people who would love to read something that's, you know, a lot more exciting, better plot, better cast of characters, and the real excitement, you know. But what comes out is, oh man, they give you degrees for this kind of stuff? Yes, Mom, they give you degrees for it because they know you can't sell it. And that's true. That's true. So don't write for the public. You'll never get anywhere doing research for the public. Now, sometimes we write good pieces for EMQ. Now that's the missionary public. And that, for the most part, is public level literature, not very sophisticated. But many of those pieces in EMQ or in the Trinity, what's the thing we're publishing here now, the Christian Education Journal, CEJ, yeah. Those are semi-popular level, and the best ones are done on the basis of research that's been done that is then rewritten to a more popular kind of an appeal, where a few ideas from the research are drawn out and then developed in more detail and more interest and a few anecdotes built in, and then that becomes the kind of stuff that you really could read to Uncle Ed, and it wouldn't put him to sleep. Well, it might, but the chances would be less. And that's what you might call semi-public. And that's the kind of stuff quite often after a dissertation hearing, you'll hear the committee say, you know, you just got to write something on this. I remember the first time that we had a student here who was a newcomer and was sitting in on her first hearing on a dissertation. And we were all excited about it, and the committee was talking, you know, really warmly and enthusiastically. And I remember I leaned over to the guy and I said, you have just got to find some place to write something on this. And of course, we'd been staring at this thing, you know, and all the time working on it during this last 2 hours. And this dear little lady sitting next to my right, she leaned over and she said, I think he already did. And I said, yeah, but it's not going to fly the way he's got it. It'll never sell at the popular level. And the point is that there's some stuff there that really could be brought into a more public consciousness or to a broader audience. But what you're writing for in dissertation and in journal writing in the tighter journals is for the others who are pushing the frontier. Questions, comments, observations on what you've done so far?
Technical question. In doing this descriptive study, we're obviously looking to confirm or disconfirm some kind of a phenomena. In going in, or some behavior, in going into the experimental study, are we assuming that we found what we looked for, or else you wouldn't be going on to?
Michelle, the way you said that makes it hard for me to agree or disagree, because I think you've overstated what you're doing the descriptive for, but you're in the right direction. Try to say it again with a little less prediction.
You're looking to describe a phenomena.
So well that
You can make
you will be
a
able
tentative.
to see interrelationships of factors. Now, those interrelationships then can be stretched into or grounded into hypotheses. So the trick is that in a descriptive study, of course you're looking for correlates, but you treat them as possible correlates or even probable correlates that need to be tested.
Okay.
So it isn't true that you have no good descriptive study if you haven't got that coming out.
Right, but you wouldn't go, I mean, if you didn't find a correlate, you wouldn't go on to do an experimental study.
Exactly.
So we are assuming that we did find, if we're using a similar research,
Right.
you would assume that you did find something to lead you to go farther, or a positive reaction.
Now, that brings me to a great place to actually segue into the main task of today, and you may have detected this, known it, and helped me along. Thank you very much for giving me a shot. You're going to do an experiment, okay? That's what we're getting ready to write, experimental study. What's the very first thing we have to have an experimental study? Very first thing. Huh? Well, that's true in terms of where you get it. The reason why this is the very first thing you need is because it's inherent to the task of doing an experiment. You've got to have a hypothesis, for crying out loud. You've got to have a hypothesis. Okay. Now then, where in the world are you going to get a hypothesis? And I mean between now and 4 o'clock. Because you will. Where are you going to get it? Previous studies. Okay, now, how many of you right now on the end of your tongue, you have it right, ready to go out, exactly where that hypothesis comes from that you're going to test? You see your hands. The rest of you, between now and 4 o'clock, are simply going to do a miracle. Is that right? You have no place to draw it except, suddenly get a miracle. Well, that's good because I have the good fairy and the tooth fairy both coming in at 3:15. No, that's not going to work. Most of you are like people in the non-scientific fields. You have read several kinds of literature. A high percentage of you have read pieces and parts, shreds, and verses in the Bible. In fact, a good many of you have read the whole thing several times. Good. That's one place. How much scientific grounding are you going to get from the Bible for a hypothesis? Not likely a whole lot all by itself. It may shed light on some things. I think it's fascinating, for example, that Jesus said, men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. Remember that? Very interesting. Do you know that's a cause-effect statement? Do you know that's a hypothesis? What's the hypothesis? What's the dependent variable? What's the independent variable? Did I go through the on day 2? Yeah, some of you know. What's the independent variable?
Actions of man. And deeds.
He says actions.
Yes, darkness or light.
Huh?
Darkness or light.
Loving? Okay, you got 2 variables, loving and doing. Okay? So which is the independent? The way Jesus said it, men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. Now every time you have a because in an ordinary relationship, the because is telling you the, believe it or not, the independent variable. Because the relationship is this happens because this. All right? So loving is an outcome of deeds. Evil deeds, evil heart. Okay? That's the way Jesus said it. That's an interesting hypothesis. And as I mentioned, if I went through this scenario with you, this to me is a very vital one because I remember it so very sharply when I was a grad student. It was in the time when psychology was teaching, as a matter of doctrine, that attitudes were the controllers of behavior. And if you just change the attitude, you can change the behavior. Well, some of you have some experience with that one in yourself, your kids, or your Sunday school class, and it doesn't work quite that way. And Jesus said it the other way around. He says, no, people love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. That's a hypothesis. And it was a discredited hypothesis. In other words, it was regarded as foolishness when I was in grad school in my earlier years. I've lived long enough to see that the field of psychology reverse itself on that one. And now today, it's very well understood that the affect or the attitudes are the outcome of behaviors. If you do evil deeds and you get satisfaction from it, you begin to love it. That's the whole point. And love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. And it's a very interesting hypothesis. Now you could still test that hypothesis. It would take a little time frame to do it. And that's one of the real heavy-duty problems in doing academic experimentation. We rarely have the time frame we need. Most good social science research is long time frame studies. Now by long time frame, I'm talking about a year or more. There are very few students at the doctoral level who will talk in terms of designing a 1 year or more dissertation. I want to get out of here by, let's see, what is it today? Well, let's see, it's in October. I'd like to get out of here by the end of November. So whatever I do, I want it to be fast. And that's a little unrealistic. Quite often doctoral students take at least a year, but they won't design a year study because they take a 3-month study and it takes them a year to get it done. Very hard to do good academic studies. It's very hard to do good academic descriptive studies, but it's not quite as difficult. No, I'm going to give you another suggestion. Since the Good Fairy and the Tooth Fairy both were booked this afternoon and I was unable to get them by 3:15, I decided to use a different technique. I decided to let you wink. All right? Now, you understand the meaning of wink? In the Western society, that means when you wink, means that there's something going on between you and me, okay? And we don't necessarily tell the world about it. All right, I'm going to let you, in effect, I'm going to let you do the unthinkable. And I'm going to wink about it, and you're going to wink back. Some of you have designed a study that's probably pretty fair. You're going to know by tomorrow afternoon whether there are many other people in the world who think it's pretty fair. But let's assume for the hour right now that it's pretty fair. And let's assume that you've already done it. Have you already done yours? The one you designed for today? Have you done the research?
Yes.
Yes. See how you notice what happened when I winked. Have you done yours? Have you actually gone into the field and collected the data and you've done this study?
Yes.
See, I didn't even have to wait at him. I mean, he's way ahead of me. Okay, here's the point. If you want to, and this is only one of several options, if you want to, you may treat the outcomes of the study you've designed for today as the source of the hypothesis for this next study. To do that, you're going to need to put it in a proper bibliographic form because it's going to have to be in the bibliography. You're going to date it 1998, and you're going to credit it to yourself. You can use a partner if you want to, if you want a fictitious partner, you know, Thomas Edison or some other creative person. You're free to do that. But the point is that when you describe that precedent that gives you the hypothesis in chapter 1, you could describe your own descriptive study, which hasn't been done yet. Now, you would not do that in the real world, and it's actually a violation of something that many instructors of research say is an absolute no-no. And I usually treat it that way too, except for this purpose. That one will get you farther down the road, and I don't want you to take a lot of time grounding that hypothesis, any more than I wanted you to take a lot of time building the literature base for your descriptive. There are more important things to do right now. Does that make sense? Now, if you say, well, I'm not sure what hypothesis would come out of my study, well, fine. Find something else then that you know enough about to be able to establish a hypothesis. One of the characteristics of this hypothesis, please, is that it makes some degree of scholarly sense. Let me give you an example of a pretty dumb hypothesis. If students study their spelling words, they will have a better spelling score on the test. Now, is that a hypothesis?
Yes.
How would I test it, whether it's a hypothesis? How would I know it's a hypothesis? What are you hearing that says yes so fast? Simply because I said it was? I'm a sneaky guy. Got to look
Cause
up.
and effect.
Huh?
Cause and effect.
It deals with a cause-effect relationship, and it deals with it in such terms that you can identify the independent and the dependent variable. What's the independent variable in that one? Independent variable. Studying the spelling word list, all right? What's the dependent variable? Better score, okay? Time on spelling task, exercise, result, better score on, could that be measured? Is it empirical? Sounds like a good hypothesis, doesn't it? It's a dumb one. Why is it a dumb one? Not because of the structure, not because of the science issues, but because, come on. It's either so close to common sense or it leaves no real substantive stuff when you get done. Well, of course, if you study something, you're apt to know more about it. Yeah, that's common sense. And furthermore, you never said study how. In what way? How much? Is it just the more the merrier? Are you assuming that, you know, if you get 10 hours on the spelling list, you're going to do better than 5 hours on the spelling list? What assumptions are you making there? It's just kind of, ugh, dumb. Now, let me give you the equivalent of that does show up in this class so that I can knock it right now. Because otherwise, Muriel and I are going to have to knock it tonight and tomorrow morning. Students who go through a training program for missionary preparation are going to be more effective in the field as missionaries. Now, let me ask you the scientific questions first. Is that empirical?
Could.
No, it's very hard. What's effective?
Okay, you're beginning to worry a little bit about the effective part there. How do we define that? How will we know it? Is it really empirical? Can we really get at that? Can I see effective? Well, gosh, I kind of hope so. But I'm going to have to spell it out. All right? But it might be possible. What about taking this course in missionary preparation, without which I won't do as well? What is being presupposed in that hypothesis? Any and all stuff of any sort called missionary training course is the same. Now, do you believe that? If you're even half smart as an educator, you would know that's stupid. There's good learning experience and there's bad learning experience. In addition to good learning experience, there's even better learning experience. And it depends an awful lot on what we mean by that learning experience. And if that kind of a hypothesis is the best you can do in here, you are not operating at a doctoral level. Boom, there, I said it. And that's the reason why I'm not going to sit still for it. That's the level of thinking that you're doing. It's not good enough. Now, in science, the whole idea of testing a hypothesis is testing some subcomponent, some fraction of the whole phenomenon, not the whole phenomenon with one set of measures. Do you know what it takes to constitute being healthy? From a scientific point of view? Hey, Bob, stand up for us. You look like a good, healthy man there. How many of you agree? Bob looks healthy. Yeah, Bob looks healthy. Now, if I took Bob into a convention of internal medicine types and they all said, what in the world are you all cheering about? We haven't got any clues other than the fact that the guy can stand up. Which is not a bad clue, but by golly, it doesn't tell the whole picture of his health. What all is involved in his health? See, from a real knowledgeable point of view, people don't throw around the word health. They talk about the pieces within it. That's what you're up against. You're not throwing around big fat generalizations even for this exercise. You are saying from the literature or from the research that I'm basing this on, even from the study that I'm doing, there is a little relationship here that needs to be tested. Some kind of a component of the whole system. But don't for a minute think that it's enough to simply say generalization over here, do it or don't do it, over against great or small over here, it is or it isn't. No, 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 no. Now, with that threat hanging over you, somebody try to give us a hypothesis. I always like to make things unlikely to succeed so that we can really test ourselves on these things. Give me a hypothesis. Anybody? Preferably, I see you, Michelle. Preferably based on the study that you have proposed doing that you're going to hand in a few minutes. I've got 2 bidders now. Three bidders, 4 bidders, good. That's bidding closed. All right, here we go. Let's see what we got. Michelle, do you want the honor of being first, or do you want to pass that on to somebody else, whatever?
Whatever you say, sir.
All right, well, let's just go ahead with you then. Please,
I'm
ma'am.
going to tell you what I was going to say and what I feel that I've just learned from what you've been talking about. I've been thinking about a hypothesis and the idea of if parents who prefer an authoritarian parenting style complete a parent effectiveness training program, they will exhibit more authoritative parenting methods. But I realize that there's something very general in there and that you're talking about picking something, so I think I could pick something like their communication will be more authoritative, or
All right, tell me what your independent variable is.
the independent variable is the training program.
Dependent variable?
The parenting style.
Now you added direction in it, better give us the rest of that.
It's directional. It will go from authoritarian to authoritative.
Okay, so you're going to get more authoritative. So you're going to get a positive change in the authoritative variable in outcomes. All right. Now, where is the biggest soft spot remaining here?
Well, it's a specific training program I'm talking about, parent effectiveness training.
All right, so it is a specific program, so it's not just D
No.
or A, but it's a particular program, the PET program.
Mhm.
Can you describe what the emphasis in that program is?
It's a cognitive program. It's somewhat based on the philosophy of Carl Rogers, the give and take and the communication.
Okay, so this is a Rogerian cognitive how's it going to be done, individually or in a group?
In a group.
All right, so it's going to be in group. You're going to use any discussion or interaction?
I believe in that program there's very little
All right.
discussion. It's not a discussion group
All right,
program.
now, here's what we're doing. We're trying to say, if we have this kind of a mush ball called training program,
We can't.
then we can go to the specific of, well, what program? Well, this one. Then we can look at it and say, what really is within that? Then we can start saying, what is it here, or what combinations are we assuming from what we know about this phenomenon that would cause us to say that's going to make a parent move in the direction of the authoritativeness. So then we can rebuild our hypothesis to the point where we can make the hypothesis specific to a particular part of this, and then we can discriminate that away from some other programs that aren't that way. So it's possible then for you to improve upon the mushball hypothesis by looking underneath the mushball. Does that make sense? Or looking inside of it. Now, did you say you had another one in mind on the basis of that?
No, I think you brought out a really good point about what is it in the parent effectiveness training program that is important. To me, it's the cognitive, that it's a cognitive program as opposed to an Adlerian behavioral program in this instance. And then to go on, and I think also on the bottom part, I think it's too general to say authoritative. What is going to change? Is it communication that's going to change? Is it type of discipline that's going to change?
Thank you. Now, what you've done is to model without too much interference from me exactly what I'm trying to get anybody or everybody to do right now, and that is to take whatever hypothesis idea you've got and try to get it down to more small-scale bites and bits. Many people will assert that social science tends to be atomistic. You understand the word atomistic? It's not a polite word. Atomistic means what? Concerned with little tiny pieces. Concerned with little tiny pieces. And a person who talks in an atomistic way will wear you out with details without ever giving you a sense of what the big picture is. And indeed, scientific research in general is atomistic in exactly this way. And it is possible to lose the big picture if you're not really careful. But the point is, you can't very often experiment with the big picture without ending up with a mush ball on one end and fog on the other. By the way, those are two common technical terms in research design. Everybody talks about mush balls and fog, and why? And some of you will need to find your way to look what's inside the mush ball and clear away the fog somehow at the other end of the hypothesis. All right?
Could you help us make this one specific? I know that.
Well, she's going so far with it that at least parenting style, which is an ultimately
Yes.
fog domain,
My question is how optimistic you want to be.
well, what you want to be is you want to be atomistic enough so that two things are true. Number one, you're sure you can measure it. You're sure you can measure it. And you can't measure effectiveness all by itself. In other words, if you don't have any other descriptors there, effectiveness won't work. The other thing you've got to have there is, in addition to the measurement of the variable, you've got to have the sense of what is the specific that is making the difference. Or what is the thing that you're, if it's a dependent variable, what is the specific part of that thing called effectiveness that you're really expecting to see the change in. Now, she said here that she's expecting to see the change in terms of a scalable, measurable quality called authoritative over against authoritarian behavior, or at least preference. That can be measured instrumentally. You see, when we're dealing with experiments, it is wonderful to be able to use instruments that will measure variables. Unlike descriptive research, where we have to come in and take the thing whole cloth and describe it, and be very careful about avoiding prejudgment. In other words, where we ask only certain questions and not others. In descriptive research, you want to keep your arms wide. In experimental research, you want to keep your fingers busy, because you're trying to pick out this over against this. And that's the difference. In descriptive research, you stand there like this. And in experimental research, you go after the pieces. And it's nice to be able to measure them. So we talk about the danger of quantification and quantified measures in descriptive research, but to believe me, they are our friends in the experiment. Okay? Now, so that can come down to a measurable right there, Jack. This one up here is going to be a lot harder to pin down, but that's the way you do it. You just say, well, what about the Rogerian? What about the cognitive? And she did that for us a moment ago. She said because of its cognitive emphasis, it pulls people away from being behavioral in the Adlerian sense. Now, there's a good example of something else we'd like to be able to mention from time to time, and that is how important it is to know who you're talking about or where an idea has come from. See, because the minute you dropped Adler, I knew what you were saying. So the rest of you may have also, because you know Adler, you know Skinner, you know some of these other And if you're saying behavioral in a Skinnerian or Adlerian sense, boom, you've communicated. That's one of the major reasons why you want to know the people, you got to know the territory, you got to know who's plowed the territory, you got to know the names, and you got to be able to drop them at the right moment. Not so you will look smart. That's not the issue. It's so you will avoid looking dumb. In other words, the point here is that you're not really making some kind of a great, hero of yourself by throwing names, dropping names in the right place. But you're avoiding having your conversation be imprecise. Yeah, I understood behavioral, but in what sense behavioral? Oh, well, kind of like this, not like that. I said, well, what's this? What's that? But you drop a name in that we know because we've studied and we know the characters who've done this work, then you're communicating. And believe thee me, at the doctoral level, if you can't do that, you're in the wrong boat, ladies and gentlemen. This is a boat for people who have been reading in the field. Hope you heard it. Hope you heard it, because that could be a very, very valuable piece of career advice for you. Good start. Now we had another one from over here. Here comes hypothesis.
Married international students who attend American universities experience both marriage stressors and marriage enhancers as a consequence of their immersion in American culture.
A hypothesis has a dependent and independent variable that are important in the understanding of the total phenomenon. Now let's play with your international students who are married, all right? Now, they will experience stressors. You're seeing that as a dependent or independent variable? Dependent. Okay. So, what is the independent truly?
They're living in, attending American universities, being immersed in American culture.
Okay, now, here's the way you rescue that from the small boys 7 years old eating green beans. If I said that small boys at age 7 who do not eat green beans, you can then begin to detect that we're talking about something other than the ordinary and the normal state of events. Now, granted that 7-year-old boys are not necessarily fond of green beans, but some do and some don't eat them. And it does make a difference. So it's not, you see, I'm not saying it's nonsense, but I'm saying it's probably not well enough focused to make a very useful, functional explainer of phenomenology. So it's not really a scientific question that you're posing. The way to pose the scientific question is to back up and say, well, now, wait a minute. Are the people entering the United States who are not married, but all the other conditions the same, going to experience more or less stressors? How do you feel about that?
I'm just telling you where I come from. I'm not defending it. Thinking my descriptive study is doing focus group interviews with international students. So I'm trying to develop what might come out of that.
Mm-hmm.
And people will say, people are likely to think that cross-cultural living only gives you stresses and confuses your life. And I guess my agenda there is that I think it's also beneficial too, and that there's both.
Okay, hop out of the political boat and get into the scientific boat, all right? Because you're in a political boat with flags.
Yes.
And I want people to know this really isn't bad no matter what the data show.
Right.
That's a politician.
Right.
Jump into the scientific boat and say, I don't care what is true, as long as it's true, I'm going to find out.
Yeah.
All right, now what is it you want to find out?
The mixture of inputs, I guess, the mixture of influences. What do people expect to find when they come here? But
Let's get the marriage stressors.
Yeah.
What do you expect to find?
Well, I expect to find that they're confronted. Many come from a third world, and they will be confronted with an egalitarian style of life as opposed to a more hierarchical where they came from. And
Which
so
causes you to hypothesize what?
this will bring them stress. They will have to, the wife will not be happy to be treated as she used to be happy to be treated. Maybe,
Now,
perhaps.
What you're doing right now is productive, but it's time consuming.
Right.
And it's what you're going to have to do a lot of in order to get your hypothesis pinned down.
Okay.
You're not on the wrong road, it's just that you're wandering around on the road. Instead of looking down the road each way to say which way do I want to go, you're actually walking side to side and say what's off the sides here.
Okay.
And that's not much of a way to treat a road.
Okay.
Your first statement was that there's a condition that will produce greater degree or type of stress or varieties of stress, right? Okay. Why don't you make a hypothesis out of that?
I'll work on it.
Well, that's one thing to do. The other thing is just to say it. You've already had it. Somebody else see it? Let's help it. The variable there that is of consequence is, do you get, in other words, the question, the research question is, do you get more or less stress if you are married from overseas? Or if you are not in your own country, or if something else is true? And I'm trying to get you to put a finger on what it is that's true that is causing this greater degree of stress. Because that's where your hypothesis lies. Let me show you a very interesting experiment. Let me show you a very interesting experiment. Sven, would you put your hand right there? All right, now watch close. Watch real close. Hypothesis. If I come down with a force of at least 20 pounds per square inch, he will move his hand. See, he was brave, he was going to stick it out. But if I had gone through with it, he would move his hand. Or he would have moved his hand in advance. Either way, he moves his hand. The point is, what in the world is it that you're bringing down on something? That's your variable. I'm controlling that variable. And I'm looking at how much it produces this variable.
I guess the variable I'm interested in is the input of culture in terms of stress. So maybe I'm comparing people who stay back in the homeland and people who come to the States to study. The guys who come here will get more stress than if they'd stayed home.
Qui. All right, say it again and put it in the form of hypothesis.
People who leave people who leave there who study in an alien culture and a new culture experience more marital stress than those who stay at home.
Does that sound like a hypothesis? Does that have a testable variable in it? Can you imagine designing a study? It's a little hard because what you're going to have to do is to get a matched set and then a matched set of people who do and don't go abroad and study.
Yeah.
But we do that kind of thing all the time. That's a perfectly legitimate hypothesis. It's only one of a dozen, you know, out of your study. Your study is a matrix for many different kinds of analyses, and that's what I mean by it isn't good enough to say this generalization produces this generalization. Very important to say what it is you're going to use to test that. What you're saying is that of comparable people being married at a comparable age in life, those that go into international experience during the next so many years as international students will experience more stress than those who don't.
Could you bring it down just to divorce rate?
You can bring it down to color of eyes, but the issue is what is it you're looking at? If he's looking at stress, that's one way to look at it. You look at divorce rates, you can do that too. You can look at all kinds of things as dependent variables, but for this study, nail it down, nail it down. And that's what now you have done. Now you could also design a study, and sometimes we design studies by saying, but what have I really got available to me? So you don't have the back home crowd available to you. What have you got available to you?
We've got the people on this side of the pond,
Some of whom are,
married,
and some are
unmarried.
very interesting. See, there's the variable that you're talking about, if they're comparable. The problem is, as a true experiment, you can't assign them to those roles. You can't say, okay, now, for the purpose of this study, you're unmarried, and you're married, and you can't do that, which is one of the shortfalls in social science. We can do that with white rabbits, but we can't do that very well with human beings. So you have a problem there.
And that hypothesis would involve all the stresses of being single too, which, you know, so you've got another set of variables.
Which raises a question of which set of stressors are for whom are the stressors greater?
Yeah.
And you may find out indeed that we all have stressors and it doesn't make a whole lot of difference, which is a perfectly legitimate outcome from an experiment. One of the things you must remember, counter to what your 7th grade science teacher taught you, a scientific experiment does not have to, quote, come out right. You're trying to close in on truth, you're not getting something that you can then trumpet about and makes a good platform for you to get in the other boat and wave the flag. You're just trying to find out what the truth is. And there are many times when assumptions we make turn out not to be true. And that's very exciting research. Research in our time does a lot of good when it knocks down preconceptions and other kinds of guesses that have gotten into the culture that people assume are true and they really aren't. For example, sitting in a cold breeze for long hours produces colds. That is, if you ask that on a true-false test of Americans, the absolute majority of Americans will say true. Scientific evidence says the temperature of the surroundings and feeling cold or not feeling cold has zero to do with catching cold. I can't even believe that. My daughter's an MD and she knows the data and she keeps saying, Dad, that's not true. But I keep saying, Sarah, for heaven's sakes, put your sweater on. Hard for me to get to it because I'm just imbued with this. She said, Dad, are you so old-fashioned? I'm getting there.